Quotation from myself, segment 75, quotation number 920. If simply being alive is a sufficient cause for happiness, as some people claim when they say something like, I just feel happy being alive, then there is no such thing as unhappiness. For the dead presumably feel nothing, and everybody else who is alive must be happy according to above proposition, which equates life with happiness. 921. When I was young, my mother and I had an unspoken agreement that as long as I do whatever she told me to do, as a compensation, I could freely express my opinions on any subject, including her directives, without fear of punishment. Of course, in reality, I have no idea that there was any agreement of this sort. For not knowing any differently, I perceive such an agreement as natural, such an arrangement as natural. These childhood habits stay with me for the rest of my life. At any place I have ever worked, I was probably the most obedient and at the same time the most outspoken employee. Needless to say, my successive superiors did not view this type of behavior with the same pragmatic benevolence as my mother did. As I had numerous opportunities to discover, people in a position of power, given a choice, would prefer disobedience on the part of their subordinates as much less undesirable to the outspokenness. For they see the outspokenness as a greater threat to their authority than disobedience, and perhaps rightly so, since a man can be forced to act against his will, but not to think or especially to feel differently. Of course, the ideal employee should be both obedient and silent. But then the world, even for those at the top, is not perfect. 922. In the normal course of life, no matter how uneventful it is, one has to stop occasionally to make an inventory of what has happened to him up till that moment, before proceeding any further. It isn't easy, often not very pleasant, but it has to be done, if one is to make sense out of his life. Different people in different times have done it differently. Recently, the Freudian psychoanalysis was a preferred choice for those who could afford it to perform this undesirable but unavoidable task. But before psychoanalysis has been invented, or rather had the name attached to it, telling one's own story to those willing to listen, or writing it down as autobiography, when no listener was available, achieved the same goal of gaining understanding who one is, whence one came from, and where one is going. Confessions, in the case of St. Augustine and Rousseau, is a case in point. (923) One who is brought up like an average American child on a steady diet of cartoons, in which everybody escapes unscathed from the endless chain of lethal accident, and where the general reaction expected and produced in the young viewers is laughter and merriment, instead of, and what would have been more natural to species, fear, horror, and revulsion with what's happening to the cartoon characters, and compassion toward them, since the harm is never real and everything seems to be done for laughs. Such a child tends to grow up into an adult with underdeveloped automatic impulse to forewarn the others of the immediate disaster or try to prevent it. For such an adult is conditioned by his previous viewing experience of the cartoons to expect something funny instead of tragic to unfold before his eyes all the time. Thus, the indifference to the suffering of the others, which American TV generation are often accused of, is not perhaps so much a result of some innate callousness, but rather of subconsciously learned disbelief into the reality of tragedy and the expectation of perpetual fun. To be fair, it didn't start with TV, for the physical misfortune of the others has been a staple of American comedy since the earliest days of Hollywood, and if one is willing to look even farther back, the notoriously cruel nature of British practical jokes could be considered as one of the possible precursors of this unfortunate modern trend. 924. Go and figure this out. While the Sikhs are desperately trying to regain health, the healthy are seemingly expending as much effort to lose it. 9-5. To all those who want to preserve traditions, culture, languages, etc., I would say stop treating the world as a museum, for it is a living body in which everything is changing constantly, while nothing disappears without a trace. So stop worrying and get on with the real life. 9-6. The human propensity to equate a personal misfortune with the general deplorable state the world is in is as common among the ordinary man as among the great philosophers. And in a certain sense, both are right. 9-7. It is no wonder that the current public obsession with computers, internet, information highway, etc., is beginning to resemble a religious cult, for it fulfills the basic promise of any successful religion, to turn no bodies into some bodies, and with a minimum effort to change on their parts. 9-8. In the world in which most of our wishes and dreams remain frustrated and unrealized, the buying of things is the easiest substitute for fulfilling our desires. The psychological satisfaction of obtaining for a change something one wants, no matter how insignificant is it, for the most people, most of the time, is strong enough to obscure the brutal fact of life, that what we want the most is obtainable the least. 9-29. Poetry has a tremendous power either to miraculously restore or completely destroy its practitioners. The certainty of this rather categorical statement is a product of my self-reflection and observation of other poets. Perhaps mistakenly, I count myself among those who have been restored by writing poetry. An explanation in my case is very simple. By the time I started to write, I was so sick both physically and spiritually that I literally hit the bottom of my existence. Consequently, I have now nowhere to go but up, and the writing was the rope I used to pull myself from the abyss of despair. On the other hand, I have seen too many people to use the same rope to hang themselves. They usually start as a young and healthy, full of energy, optimism, and even talent, budding poets, But as the song goes, it isn't where you start, but where you finish. For slowly but surely the road sets in, and the disturbing signs of writing, fatigue and weariness, such as self-doubt, creative impotence, writing block, feeling of inadequacy, frustration of being unrecognized, bitterness of being rejected, etc., 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 begin to show up with ever-increasing frequency and severity. Also, as a side effect, the young poets often discover in the process of writing the things about themselves, those close to them, and life in general, they wish they didn't, or it makes them profoundly unhappy and disillusioned. All in all, they hit the bottom too, though not because of the life hardship, as ordinary folks do, but as a casualty of the writing disease, often aggravated by use of alcohol and drugs. But no matter how one gets there, the bottom is bottom, and very few, if they can help it, are willing to stay there forever. Yet what has helped me, people destroyed by poetry cannot use, because in my experience the writing has been the life-giving beam of hope, lifting me up, while in theirs the death-breathing, devouring monsters dragging them down. So in their case, the return to normal, ordinary life, with all its banality of hardship, is the only way to go. For in a sense, the cure must always be opposite to the disease, and as those who are sick of life sometimes find the cure in writing, those who are damaged by writing can find the cure in an act of simple living. Though due to the inescapable chronological limitation, the latter could be much harder to do than the former. For while one can, at least in theory, write almost till the moment of death, there is a great difference between what one can do being 20 and being 40 or 50. To those who would accuse me of painting too bleak a picture and point to some well-known instances when a novice developed into mature and satisfied poet more or less unscathed, I would reply, not too many, not too many. For the casualty rate, in my opinion, is too high. So if I am asked to summarize in one sense what I have been saying so far, it would be something like this. First try living, then writing, and not the vice versa. Of course, I am fully aware that I am not completely out of the woods either. But as long as I can manage to steer clear of sea like Charybdis, of being rejected and being unrecognized, I hope to survive their terrifying, beautiful addiction. I hope to survive this terrifyingly beautiful addiction to writing.